Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Settling in. Day 2 of our retreat. First day with Nirmal Santi. Having lots of good interactions, people coming together, the feeling of creating a space and a container. And it takes time for that to have an effect on the mind, for that to bring deep levels of concentration. In some cases we can be impatient. When am I going to start to get joy, concentration, energy arising in practice? But it's a matter of momentum. Before coming into retreat, we've got our home practice, whatever it is. And that helps us maintain where we are in our practice. But it usually takes a better container and more intensive effort to make progress. This is part of why people become monastics. They just need more time, they're more dedicated to getting that sense of forward progress. But as I was talking about last night, the Samaññaphala Sutta, Digha Nikaya 2, which we're using as our framework during this retreat, gives us a very beautiful sense of the way peace and joy unfolds naturally in the practice, and the way that they come not based on effort even, or from technique, but from a causal process that happens when we shift. We shift from one paradigm to another. So talking last night on this first stage of peace that we get, the easiest to see, the stage of peace, and we'll always have accessible to us for the rest of our lives, happens when we come in contact with the Dhamma. When the Buddha arises in the world and teaches the Dhamma, the truth, the reality of the way things are, and gives people the opportunity to live a pure and complete spiritual life. And we're not born into this. We're not born with the ability to understand language and to be able to think things through. But sometime in our lives, there's a change, and this change is us going from not having heard and understood the Dhamma, not knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt what is right and wrong, to knowing, to having heard. From that moment, we have access to a peace and a joy that is not based on conditions. The peace and joy we get from eating or sleeping or buying something or being given a compliment is temporary satisfaction. But at any moment of our lives, we can avert our minds to the Triple Gem, to the teachings we've heard, to the teachers that have inspired us, to the practice we've done. And we can develop joy and confidence, a level of peace that we have access to at any time. So the first day of a retreat is often just tapping into this. We've gotten into a practice environment. It means we don't have to struggle, we don't have to strain. We can just let that reality work its magic on the mind, loosen the tension, loosen the worry. Let us settle into the retreat environment. Let us settle into our bodies. Because there is this pervasive sense of our mortality when we're in the worldly paradigm. This pervasive sense of the clock is ticking. This wondering, nagging in the back of our mind, are we spending our time as well as we can? But when we've committed to formal practice, when we've set aside the time, that voice can go quiet. Because we know, for better or worse, we're doing it, we're trying, we're applying ourselves, and we'll get whatever results we can get. And this evening, we took a look at the next stage of development, the next stage of development of peace and joy, the energy from the practice. It's usually coming for a practitioner when they've settled into a rhythm of practice, when they've established their confidence in the teaching, and their confidence in causality. But in the sutta, in Tika Nikaya 2, it's presented as one going forth and taking on the precepts. This is a very large section in the sutta, a section dealing with morality. And this is because if we were to look at the easiest, most accessible, biggest gain that we can get in terms of peace and joy for ourselves, we would look to our actions and the consequences of our actions and try to live a more skillful life. The Buddha says at the end of the section on morality that when one has purified their sila, purified their conduct, they dwell with a blameless peace. And this is something we can investigate and establish in ourselves as we begin to settle into the rhythm of retreat. Now, this retreat in particular that we're doing here is not the most rigid of structures. People are still coming and going, they've still got jobs, they're raising families, but they're able to tap into the best of their abilities. So in terms of agreements and promises, there's flexibility for the challenges we face and working practice into our schedules. Some of the things that there aren't flexibility about regard the precepts. Really trying to create a space that is safe and is welcoming, and that is oriented in the direction of truth. Because otherwise, how could we possibly get the results we're seeking? And there are places in the world at this very moment where it isn't possible to practice without fear of violence. Places in this world where we can't set something down for fear that it will get stolen or damaged. Places where we dwell fearful of our friends and family and what might be done to them. But we can look at our own lives in this very moment, look at what we have, the time that we've set aside, and see if those conditions are true for us at this moment. As well as true that these things are happening somewhere in the world. There is also the peace of not being in these situations. And it's a peace that is not guaranteed being in the human realm. But the probability of experiencing this kind of peace and joy drastically goes up, improves, our odds improve greatly if we practice the precepts. If we create in our own lives harmlessness, integrity, and truth. And this, as the Buddha says, is a blameless peace. And this is what the whole spiritual life is about. It's shifting from conditioned peace, peace that comes from getting our way, peace that comes from having something, peace that comes from getting just the right relationship in the moment, transitioning, transcending to a peace that is unconditioned. When we have let go in our hearts of the capacity for violence, for hate, and we have let go of all of the suffering that comes from those mind states. We've let go of greed for other people's things, replaced it with joy at their gain and success, of access to a peace and security that we can never get from amassing fortunes. And when we dwell with love in our hearts for the people around us, through good and through ill, then we never need fear of having love in our lives, because we have learned how to generate it. It's always here, accessible to us. And as we settle into retreat, we get more and more hours of formal practice under our belt, and we get momentum in terms of doing the meditation practice. And we'll find that our minds become concentrated and we can attend to our meditation object, be it the breath or the body or loving kindness or whatever. And that's good. It develops samadhi. It helps us in the next parts of the sutta, dealing with getting past the hindrances and developing mindfulness, clear comprehension, and contentment. But in all those moments where the mind starts to unravel a little and we lose focus, we don't have to look any further and just avert the mind to this layer of blameless peace. There's no blame for one who gives themselves to practice and who gives up violence and theft and lying and deceit. There's no blame for such a one. So that's a level of peace that we can develop confidence in, and we can just abide in it. And the undercurrent of all this transitioning, the reason and the import of switching from conditioned peace to unconditioned peace, from temporary peace to stable peace, deals with charging the mind up. And the more that we begin to establish the mind on peace and joy that is not moving, that is not shaky, that is not temporary, the more energy we have at the ready, the more energy there is in the mind at all times. And the more subtle things to come, the mindfulness, the contentment, the concentration, will become closer and closer. There'll be less work to be done, less harmful mental states that need to be let go of, more joy and delight, a sense of transcendence that we always have access to. So these are some thoughts to take with us for the next day of practice into the night.